Welcome to Team Referral Network's monthly webinar series, our Brown Bag Lunch and Learn. Did you all bring your lunch? It might be a different time zone for you, so you may be having an afternoon snack, or some of you could be having an evening snack or a glass of wine. If you're in some of our international markets, it might even be the next day. But welcome, everyone. Our webinar series features information for busy business people who want and want to know the information that we're going to share with them to succeed. Today's topic is the 12-week year. And love this topic. I love this book. I was first introduced to it a year ago, and it has made a huge difference in my world. And I'm very excited to introduce our expert and the author of this book, Brian Moran. He is the driving force behind many successful entrepreneurs and leaders in industry today. His unique combination of experience and insight provides a platform for individuals and organizations to take quantum leaps in their performance. Brian's breakthrough approach has been field tested and proven, and I can attest to that. As a speaker, Brian is thought-provoking and passionate. He challenges the audience with action-based concepts and strategies. His engaging and interactive sessions range from a 1-hour keynote to a 2-day workshop. Whatever the length, the sessions challenge the business as usual mentality and offer fresh insights into what it takes to achieve greatness. His partial client list includes AXA, Allstate, BBVA, Compass, Becton Dixon, MassMutual, and many other well-known companies and organizations. Everybody, please help me welcome Brian Moran. Brian, are you there?
I am. Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you.
Great to have you here with us. I'm really excited to dig into this topic. I am personally attached to your 12-week year program, and I have brought many people into the 12-week year program as well. So I'm really excited to get us going here. So why don't you tell us, what is the 12-week year?
It really is a system to help you accomplish more in less time. We talk about accomplishing more in 12 weeks than most in 12 months, and it's more than just a tagline. I mean, our clients actually do that. So at the 30,000 foot level, it's just a process and a system that helps you get more of what you want faster.
You know, you bring up the element of time, and when I was listening to the webinar that you and Michael did, I heard you say that a lot of us are under the illusion of a lot of time. The illusion of a lot of time. Like, we really think we have this whole year to accomplish goals, and that illusion of time really can be to our detriment, right?
Absolutely. That was one of the things when we started working with the fundamentals of execution, because everything we do is designed to help you execute. It's not enough to know. People have great ideas, they have all kinds of resources. In the end, you've got to implement. And as we started to work with the fundamentals of what it takes to implement and execute at a high level, we still ran into the issue that people were operating in an annual cycle, and no one even questioned it. And so we were getting good results, but we weren't getting what we felt our clients were capable of. And it was that illusion that you mentioned. And shortly here, the calendar is going to flip in January. Everyone's going to be excited, right? Everybody's going to think best year ever. And we're going to get to the end of that month, and most people are going to be behind their goal. And yet no one's going to be concerned with that. And the reason is because the thinking says, oh, I got 11 more months to catch up. And it's that mindset that gets in the way of people accomplishing what they're capable of. It's not about working harder or longer or some secret sauce that they're unaware of. It's being more consistent with the execution around the things that really matter.
Isn't that true? And, again, in that recording, when I was listening to it, you and Michael talked about the gap between what we know and what we do. And I know I'm guilty of that. I know what I'm supposed to do. I know how I should plan out my day and map out all of my big activities and the things that I need to do. But that gap between what we know and what we do is probably one of our greatest challenges as business professionals, right?
Well, personally too, I mean, it's the difference between living the life you're capable of and the life you're living now. I mean, if people just more consistently acted on what they know, right, they'd make more money, they'd be in better health, they'd have better relationships. I mean, the whole 9 yards. And yet what most people are doing is they're off in search of a new idea, right? That one idea that they're missing that's going to make it all come together, when the reality is it's really about the execution.
It really is. Just do it, kind of, right?
Yeah.
So I've seen you say this, or I've heard you say this, and I've seen it in your materials. Throw out the annual plan. How is the 12-week year different from just breaking up our annual plan into the quarter system?
Yeah, so think about it. It's a really good question. And some people look at it and say, oh, it's just semantics, right? But think about that. The quarter's what? What's a quarter? It's a fourth of a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And so the 12-week year is very different than that. The 12-week year is the year. There's a hard line in the sand, right? A point at which you're going to measure your success or failure. And then you're going to celebrate the progress and success, and then you're going to reload. So for us, every 12 weeks is a year end, and it's a fresh start. And though there aren't 4 of those in the year, that's annualized thinking. And that's the mindset that has to shift. So our clients don't operate, you wouldn't take an annual goal and divide it by 4. What we found is that's pretty limiting more than anything else. And building plans annually, I mean, think about that. That's what people did 80, 90 years ago. And yet most people are still doing that, but the environment we're in is so much more hectic, and the pace of change so much more rapid, that those annual plans, one, they're overwhelming from the get-go. They diffuse the individual, and they're outdated by the middle of the year. So that whole process, if you want to perform at your best, has to change.
I just couldn't agree more. I've been, a victim of annual planning for a long time, and other people might call themselves that as well. It's that, that first quarter comes and goes, and you think, oh, I didn't quite get where I wanted to be, but I still got plenty of time left. And second quarter comes and goes, still got 6 months left. Third quarter comes and goes, and then all of a sudden you're in that panic-induced frenzy trying to drive everything during that last quarter. Guilty, guilty, guilty. I am guilty. That's why I think the 12-week year is so amazing. So let's dig in a little bit here. Our screen here talks about the 3 principles. Would you share those with us?
Yeah, so what the 12-week year is made up of, first is operating in that context of 12 weeks as a year, but then we bundled it with a set of disciplines and principles that drive high performance. And they drive it in any area, whether it's in your personal life, whether you're a musician, whether you're an athlete, whether you're in business, it really doesn't matter. And we didn't invent this stuff, Kelly, we just packaged it. But the 3 principles we look at are, one is the principle of accountability. And that's a very misunderstood concept. I mean, most people equate that with consequences. Typically, where you hear that word used in society, it's, affiliated with bad behavior, poor performance, negative consequences. Somebody does something wrong, and then someone in authority says, we're going to hold them accountable. And we hear that verbiage at work all the time too. We're going to hold this person accountable. And what they're really talking about is creating a negative consequence when they don't do what they're supposed to do. That's not accountability. And so, accountability is the recognition that you have choice, and then taking ownership of those choices. So accountability is really ownership. So that's the first principle. And when people really get that, that can be a life-changing principle, because it's probably the one principle that they have, or the one concept, if you will, that people have to live the life they want to live. It's probably the most powerful concept they have to live that life, when you really understand what it is and what it isn't.
I love that. I have some people in my world who are afraid of accountability as a word too, and I do think it's that negative connotation. So thank you for clearing that part up. Yeah, I like that.
It absolutely is. And then we have other people, we'll hear people say, well, I just need someone to hold me accountable, which we laugh, because that's probably the least accountable thing you could say. I mean, you're really trying to transfer the burden to somebody else. The burden of perform is yours.
Yeah.
Take ownership of it.
Ownership.
The second principle then is the principle of commitments. And they kind of go hand in glove with accountability. But with the 12-week year, we look at commitments on 2 levels. There's personal commitments, those promises I make to myself. I'm going to work out, spend time with the family, going to make my phone calls if that's part of my role, right? And then there's the commitments I make to others or my word, and just learning how to be more effective on those two levels. We get more of what we want in life. And then that third principle is what we call greatness in the moment. And that's this notion that life is lived in the moment, and that ultimately greatness is created in the moment. And yet I think most people think if they're ever going to be great, it's sometime in the future, right? When the income's at a certain level, when the relationships look a certain way, when my body is the way I want, right? The fact of the matter is you're great in the moment or you're not. And either way, that's reflected in your future. So helping people really understand that the greatness happens right now, because that's really all we have, right? A minute ago is a memory. A minute from now is not here. All we have is right now. And the more we can be present and the more we can be great in that moment, the more life's going to show up for us the way we want. And so those are the three principles that undergird this concept of the 12-week year.
Powerful. I love it. Accountability is ownership, commitment, and greatness in the moment. Wonderful. The next screen is going to talk about the 5 disciplines, which are different than the 3 principles, right?
Yeah, I really think of those principles as character-based at some level. I think of the disciplines as more strategies or approaches. And the challenge with these is people have heard these before, and they're applying them to some degree if they have any degree of success. And so the challenge with that is that when we see stuff we tend to know, there's a tendency to say, oh, I know that, and you're looking for something new. The challenge to your listeners is to really learn how to leverage these, because when we do that, profound things happen. The average sales rep has a 20-30% bump in their first 12 weeks. And
wow.
We have thousands literally that have 100, 200, 300, 400% increases. So as we talk about these, don't check out and go, oh, I've heard that before. Of course you've heard it before because they're fundamental. But it starts with vision, right? So right out of the gate, people go, yeah, I've heard that before. But here's the thing. We don't start with your business or your career, because that's part of life. With the 12-week year, we start with your life. What do you want your life to look like 3 years from now, 5, 10, 15 years in the future? And by the way, what does great look like? God willing, you're going to be here. Let's make it great. Then we look at your career, your business. What do you need to do there to line and enable that? So ultimately, that flows through to your plan and your daily actions. So there's this emotional connection to what you do Monday through Friday and the life you want to live. And honestly, the stronger that connection is, the easier it is for you to step out and do things differently and do different things. Because truth is, if you're going to create different results, you're going to have to do things differently. You're going to have to do different things. And without a compelling vision of the future that's bigger than the present, what happens is we all choose what's comfortable and familiar, the things we've done in the past. And that's how great performers become mediocre. That's how great companies go out of business. So, it all starts with that vision, and a vision that's real. It's not I'm going to be the best at this or the best at that. It's really, what do you want in your life 3 years from today? In as much detail as you can muster, from income to your home, to your self-esteem, to your confidence, to the relationships, your health, all the stuff that matters to you. Not what society says should matter, but what matters to you, so that there's an emotional connection to it.
Yeah, that's powerful. And what's our next of the disciplines?
So then comes planning, right? Once we're clear on what we want, then we build a plan. 12-week planning is very different than traditional planning, though, in some of the ways we've touched on already, right? Most plans have too much in them. You're overwhelmed, you're diffused. 12-week plans are all about focus. And there's a way to write the plan and structure the plan that improves the implementability. I joke that may not even be a word. I don't know, but it's pretty descriptive. So the only reason we plan with the 12-week year is because it helps you execute. But how the plan is written and how the plan is structured impacts whether or not you can implement it. So there's a structure to that is very simple: goals, tactics, and tactics are statements in the plan that describe specific actions that you need to take. Most people plan conceptually; they don't plan tactically, and you can't execute concepts. Get referrals. Great concept. you can't execute that.
Right.
And so really getting tactical. And I think of all the things, when we do, one-day workshops and boot camps and things like that, I think the thing that people struggle with the most is learning how to plan tactically, because it's subtle, but it's profoundly different. And I think they struggle with seeing and understanding what's different about it. And the other piece of that is, when you plan tactically, there's nowhere to hide, because it's spelled out step by step, with no gray area. And so it sort of wrings out all the, all the fluff, and you're left with the stuff that really matters, which is a challenge. But the cool thing is you don't have to be perfect on the execution. So, we encourage our clients to really be willing to plan tactically, because one, when you plan tactically, you'll know the magnitude of the work. When you plan conceptually, there's always more work in the plan than what it appears. The second thing that'll happen when you plan tactically is you'll know at the beginning of the 12 weeks what matters most for the next 12 weeks. And then the third thing is, and this may be the biggest benefit, is when you plan tactically, it leaves a breadcrumb trail. So you'll be able to make smaller adjustments more frequently, which is really how we help people accelerate their success. It's not about working harder and longer. It's about making those adjustments more frequently.
Excellent. And next in our 5 disciplines?
We call it process control, and that's just our term for tools and events that really help you work the plan. I love what Mike Tyson, the boxer, said. He said, everyone has a plan till they get hit in the mouth. That's my best Mike Tyson. But it's true, right? So having a vision, having a plan is not enough. Process control are some tools and events that we insert into the environment so that you don't have to rely solely on personal discipline. Because I don't care, I'm a very disciplined person, but there's days when I'm not as disciplined as other days. And so if I don't have things like process control, I end up inconsistent and I end up frustrated. And then the next discipline is scorekeeping, right? Measurement. It's really the anchor of reality. It's where we go out to the physical universe and we get feedback on our results. And this is another area where the people shy away from, Kelly. There's so much head trash about what measurement is and what it isn't. Some industries call measurement accountability, right? Because they use it to beat people up and things. All it is feedback. And so your listeners may be familiar with the terms lead and lag indicators. Those are just, measures that help you make sense of, are you progressing or not? And there's one lead indicator that's most powerful lead indicator we have that people aren't even aware of it. And that is a measure of your execution. So when people are on the 12-week year, they track their results, they score their execution. And the reason is, I'll ask it in a question, Kelly, what do we have greater control over, our actions or our outcomes?
Yeah, definitely have greater control over our actions.
Yeah, exactly. We don't control the outcomes. We desire and we influence them. The goals are the outcomes. The tactics in the plan are the actions. So we're going to measure the goals. How are we tracking? If I got a sales goal, we're going to measure weekly how we're tracking against that, but we score execution. And so what we're looking at there is, did I do what I said I needed to do in order to create the outcomes I said I wanted to create? And it's really powerful.
That is powerful. And I know this last discipline is going to be one that resonates with me and possibly with our audience as well.
Yeah, and that's time use. Because everything happens in the context of time. But now here's the interesting thing, right? Think about this. What's the first thing you need to know to be effective with your time? And when I ask groups that, I get answers like, well, how much we have. And I would argue we all have the same until we drop. Some will say, well, what matters most? That's really important. It's not the first thing. How I'm using it, important, not the first thing. The first thing is, what do you want? Now think about that. That's the vision question, isn't it? The next question is, what matters most? That's the planning question. The next question is, are you doing it? That's the execution question. The next question is it producing? That's the measurement, the scorekeeping question. So there's a sequencing to these disciplines, even for you to be effective with your time. If you don't have those other pieces in place, you might be more efficient. You can't be effective.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is you get more efficient at the stuff that doesn't matter. Yeah, so the 12-week year takes those 5 disciplines, those 3 principles, bundles them in the context of 12 weeks as a year, where there's clarity and focus on what matters most and a healthy sense of urgency to do it, not the panic that you talked about that happens at the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing magical, just more of the important stuff gets done day in, day out, week in and week out. And a few days of that, a few weeks of that, not much, not a big deal. But, you know, day after day after day, week after week after week after week after week, and it starts to act like compound interest. And it's
Mm-hmm.
amazing. 12 weeks is a long enough time where you don't lose sight of the deadline, but you can make amazing progress.
That's great. I love that. So we need to become a visionary, right? Create that big vision.
It's absolutely the start of it. Yeah. But the
I
other
know.
thing about that vision, it's not just a big vision. It has to have relevance, right?
Mhm.
I see some people, they create this vision, they're going to have 6 houses and all this stuff, but it's so far off in the future and it's so disconnected that it's not a motivation for them. You know, for some people, the motivation might be, I got $100 left over at the end of the month.
Right.
You know, that might be a better vision near term. So the thing about the vision is it should stretch you, but there should be some relevance to it. It should be meaningful to you, and it should create this emotions when you read it and when you look at it that, man, you know, I'm willing to go through walls to get there. And so sometimes people stretch too much, and that doesn't happen. It just seems so outlandish that they don't believe it. So there's that sweet spot between that stretch and really, you know, that desire, and making sure that you find that sweet spot.
Well, and you reference the emotional connection, because I'm even welling up and getting tears and goosebumps right now. I wrote my long-term vision over the weekend. And, you know, I purchased the field guide a few weeks back and kind of let it sit there and didn't jump into it. And then I knew I'm doing this webinar with you, and I'm doing the strategic planning meeting with my directors, and I was going to be introducing this. And so, you know, I jumped in deep this weekend, created that space and time where I could be alone and uninterrupted. And I wrote a vision of the long-term vision, which is this kind of the starting point here is creating this big vision. And it makes me cry. And then I read it to my directors in our strategic planning meeting on Monday, and I started to cry. I mean, it's really important to create that emotional connection. It really is.
Right.
I mean,
and then the key is to stay connected to it. Don't just create it and put it in a drawer somewhere.
Right.
I've laminated mine. I've got a little reminder in my Outlook every day that says connect with vision. Sometimes I read through the whole thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
The long term, the 3-year.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I'll pick a couple items and just mentally stand that ground. But it's really about, once you create it, is when it really starts to benefit. You know, it's the staying connected to it where you really benefit from it. So you got to be intentional about that.
Yes.
Right, because it's easy to just sort of set it aside.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think that's what most of us do.
Yeah, especially if there's any bumps in the road. Oh, that sounded good when I wrote it, but man, I'm struggling right now. And so you kind of forget about the vision, and you're in survival mode or whatever. You gotta stay connected to it.
Yeah, and even if you are in survival mode, and a lot of people are today, just getting back and reconnecting that can give you hope, you know, can give you motivation, can reattach you to it to change. I loved the getting started exercise on this, which was the have, do, be. For me, just my interpretation, I'm not sure, here I am with the author, you know, telling you my interpretation, but I loved the free formness of have, do, be. You know, that just gave me a chance to kind of do a brain dump. Was that how you designed it?
Yeah, and that's not, you know, other people have done that exercise. It's a fun exercise though, and And what we encourage people to do is that's where you get really crazy, right? Get out on the skinny branches, put some stuff on there that's outrageous. Some of it's going to matter, some of it's not, but just have fun with it, right? What are all the things you want to have in life? Material things, non-material things. What are the things you want to do? Who do you want to be? How do you want to show up? And, you know, you kind of take them one column at a time, and you can do it with family and spouse and friends, and share it, and it gets really exciting, and you can kind of steal some of their stuff if you like it. And so we have a lot of fun with that in our workshops.
Yeah, I really loved that element, and it really got me motivated to get going with this. So I thought that was great. Then I know we move into our long-term vision, but we create this 3-year personal vision, and then the 3-year business vision. And of course, as I know you're going to explain here, this is what it's about, and this is how we're going to do it. And there's always that connection between the two.
Yeah, and so we separate those just because sometimes it's easier for people to think about them, you know, because people tend to compartmentalize some of that. The reality is, you know, in the end, it's all holistic, right? If work's going great and your personal life sucks, that's not so great. If your personal life's great and work sucks, that's not so great either. So, but I think it's just sometimes easier for people to think about it that way. But in the end, it all comes together, right? What's the life I want to be living, and how does my work enable that directly? So how does it build my confidence? How do I enjoy it? But also, oftentimes, work funds some of the other visions. Some of the elements of the vision take money. How do I do that? I do better in my career and things like that. So those two are really tied closely. We have you think about them sometimes separately, but it's in the end, they all come together under one. Here's where I want to be 3 years from now, or here's where I want to be 5 years from now.
Yeah, I love that part of it too. So how do we take action to make our vision powerful?
It's going through those disciplines. It's really taking that vision and bringing it near term to 12 weeks and setting a 12-week goal and building out that tactical plan, and then using those other elements we talked about to consistently execute it, knowing that you're not going to be perfect. The 12-week year, we talk about the 12-week year as a guilt-free zone, right? When I look at last week, I can't change anything about last week. So I never look back to beat myself up. I look back to learn. Was it a great week? Or what made it a great week? You know, did I execute well? Okay, what facilitated that? What choices did I make that helped me execute the plan better? How can I repeat that this week? Or did I really struggle last week? What do I need to do different this week so I don't repeat that? But it's all about just learning, and the 12-week year is the continuous learning system as you apply it. You know, there's no perfect plan, and so what you're doing is you're creating that vision, building that plan that aligns with it, knowing it's flawed, and then you're going out in the marketplace using the other disciplines and really succeeding or failing as fast as you can, and then coming back with that feedback and tightening it up. And so that's how you accelerate the success.
That's great. And, you know, we break it down with the goals and the planning, and then also with our next slide, and you've talked about this already, being specific and measurable. I think I'm guilty of, and maybe, again, some of our listeners are guilty of this too, is I absolutely cram too much into my goals, my planning. You know, it is, even in my day, I run my life by an electronic calendar. You know, I use Google Calendar, but I also carry around paper and make lists, and I'm just, I want to do so many things. And I love the fact that you've talked about this being a guilt-free zone, and where you really drill it down to 1, 2, 3 goals, right? And then the specific actions, the tactics that need to happen in order to achieve that. And then, you know, take that through and time bound it to the plan, right?
Yeah, so think about it. Here's why that is. What people don't realize, and it's masked when you're working in an annual environment, and that is that you have limited capacity. You have limited physical capacity, you have limited emotional capacity, intellectual energy. And that's not something the 12-week year creates. That exists. With the 12-week year, though, because we're not working in a 12-month cycle, working in a 12-week cycle, it sort of shines a light on that. And so that's where you really have to come to grips with, look, I can't be great at everything. And so our philosophy is let's be great at a few things versus mediocre at many. And the reality is it's 12 weeks. It goes by pretty fast. So, that's why we say one goal is better than two. If this is your first 12-week year and you're using it for business, do one business goal, one personal goal. Right? Because the more goals you get, the greater the likelihood that you're not going to execute well on any of them because of that capacity. There's always going to be day-to-day stuff. There's always going to be things like that. And the more you try and take on, the less effective you're going to be in each area. So it's really about, let's pick a few areas and move the needle over the next 12 weeks. And then at the end of that, we'll decide what to focus on. And you do that in a couple 12-week years, and honestly, it can be life-changing.
Yep, I agree. So how do we do a 12-week year game plan? What's our overview of this?
Well, it starts with the goals and remembering that goals are outcomes. So what we'll see when we do workshops, we'll ask people if they set personal goals, and most of them do. And I'll say, so did anyone set a workout goal? And there's always a number of hands that go up.
Right.
And I'll ask the group, so what's the problem? If I have a goal that says work out 4 days a week, what's the problem with that? And people will say, well, it's not specific enough. Okay, I'm going to work out with weights 1 hour, 4 times a week. What's the problem with that as a goal, right? And I get these different thoughts. But here's the problem with it as a goal. It's not a goal, it's a tactic. It's an action. And if we set it as a goal, what happens is it breaks down really fast. In 2 weeks, it becomes drudgery because it's not attached to anything more aspirational. And I've yet to meet someone that their true goal is to work out. It's always to lose weight, lower blood pressure, look better, get in a swimsuit, something like that. That's the goal. So when you think about your game plan, the first thing is getting the goals right. Because if we don't get the goals right, you have no chance of getting the tactical plan right.
Yep.
So really thinking about the goals as outcomes, succinctly stated, specific and measurable. There's some criteria there, and then really figuring out the tactical plan. And the same thing here, less is more. We look for the critical few. Not everything you could possibly think of to accomplish the goal, but what's the least number of actions to accomplish the goal? So what you're forced to do then is sort through all the actions and pick the ones that are going to have the greatest impact. So otherwise, we're just overwhelming ourselves again, right? We put all this stuff in the plan. We're going to gravitate towards the stuff that we've always done, which will get us what we got, not get us to the next level. So you kind of brainstorm, what are all the things I could do? So let's take a sales goal. Let's say I got a sales goal, I think about all these things I could do. Then I'm going to sort that. I'm going to say, if I could only do one of these things over the next 12 weeks, which one would have the greatest impact? And then I ask the next week, if I could only do one more. And typically, those aren't even tactics yet. They're concepts. So we have to break them down into those statements that describe the action you take. And so we're left with a plan that might have 6 tactics, it might have 16, it might have 60, but the least number to accomplish the goal. Not the least number, every goal would have 1 tactic, the least number to accomplish the goal. Right. And I can't tell you what that is. Every goal is different for every person, but really thinking through it. And that's one of the differences with 12-week planning over traditional planning, is really understanding how to create a tactical plan.
I really, again, this just so resonates with me. And when we talk about barriers and challenges to this, the one thing I really loved about the field guide is it forced me to write out what I felt were my barriers or my challenges with achieving the goal or achieving the plan. And that's almost like, okay, putting it out there so I know it could happen, and then I know exactly what I'm going to do to make sure it doesn't happen. So what are some of the barriers and challenges that we can think about how to overcome? What is the strategy for that?
They're different. They're different for everyone, but I will tell you that the biggest thing I think we all face in terms of the barrier between, living the life we're capable of and the life we're currently living is that we're wired for comfort.
Right.
I mean, most people agree it takes sacrifice to be great, but I would argue you don't have to You don't have to sacrifice your family or your values, your integrity, your health, your sanity, but you're going to have to sacrifice your comfort. And that's the biggest bugaboo, to be honest with you. You know, making the choice in the moment to do the heavy lifting. And the heavy lifting for most of us isn't physical lifting, it's the emotional lifting of doing the actions that are uncomfortable, the things I don't really want to do. So I find avoidance activities, or I'll fill the plan with other stuff that's easier. That's the biggest challenge.
You know, it's so true. I see people who visit a team referral network chapter. You know, they come in, and we all know that public speaking, standing up and talking in front of people is a real challenge for some people. And, you know, they know they want more business. They know they want to build the right relationships. They know they can get referrals from being part of our organization. Yet it's that challenge of getting outside their comfort zone and standing and speaking and having to engage with people and those things that make them uncomfortable. Those that take the leap, I mean, I've seen people who are literally ready to throw up when they stand up to give a 1-minute business commercial, and they join team, and 3 months later, you can't shut them up during their team presentation, you know?
Yeah.
But you got to take that leap, right?
Absolutely. And here's the thing. If you're going to grow, you got to do it constantly. It's not one of those, oh, I did it. You know, I did that 3 months ago. Well, that's great, but it's kind of got to be a daily thing. And that's the challenge. Because it doesn't matter how successful you are. I think people think, they look at people that are more successful and they go, oh, that person's fearless. No, they're not. You know, when they're on new ground, they have the same kind of fears, same doubts and everything else. They just don't let it stop them from doing it. And so as long as you're growing, there's a level of discomfort to that. I mean, that's really personal leadership is about being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Because if you're growing, that's what you're pressing into every day.
Yeah, you got to get comfortable.
The more willing you are to press into that, the quicker you're going to grow.
Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I like that.
Yeah.
So one of my favorite tactics when things to do in order to get to the place of knowing what my action items or my tactics are is the mind mapping. And I noticed that you had that with the field guide. I love it. Tell our audience a little bit about mind mapping.
Mind mapping's cool because it's a way to think about things in a non-linear fashion. So, you know, planning's problem solving at one level, and most of us have learned to problem solve in a linear fashion, almost outlined step 1, step 2, step 3. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it creates predictable output. Mind mapping is where you take your goal, you put it in the middle of the page, and then you just brainstorm all the things you could do, but you circle those items and tie them almost like spokes on a wheel, and it's the graphical representation that taps a different portion of your brain. So if you do mind mapping, you just list the stuff, you're not going to get the same output. It's really creating that kind of messiness on the page that you'll end up with other stuff come out that wouldn't normally come out. And it comes out in waves. I mean, you'll get this initial wave, and then if you sit and you wait, there'll be another wave. And if you wait, there's another wave. And you know, having some other people involved in it, so you've got some other brains in the process. Everybody kind of cooking in the kitchen at the same time. You'll get a lot of great stuff. And then is when you step back and you sort that, right? If I could only do one thing on this, what would it be? And then working on the things you chose, really turning those into tactics as opposed to concepts like we talked about. But mind map, you know, we're going off site tomorrow for 2 days to do our plan because of the holidays. It's a little earlier than normal, but we mind map every goal we have, and we take a picture of that on the flip chart, because as we're executing it, if things aren't going quite the way we wanted, we always come back to that and say, okay, what else could we try, right? And based on what the market's telling us, some of those things will stand out and say, okay, that's the one.
Great. That's really
It's especially useful if you're working in teams, Kelly, because it gives everyone a chance to have input, and then you can talk about, you know, and debate which ones matter most, so that you're creating that buy-in as we're building the plan.
Great. I love that. We're going to be getting down on time here, so I want to just quickly give us a couple of success tips here in order to make this work.
Well, one is give yourself some grace. It's not going to be perfect. And you're never going to be perfect anyways. You don't need to be perfect. You just want to be more consistent. The second thing is apply the disciplines as a system. Vision, planning, process control, scorekeeping, time use. Don't just pick the pieces you like. If you do that, you'll get some benefit. If you apply it as a system, you'll get better every 12 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And then recognize also that you're going to stumble. You know, I've been doing this with the 12-week year for a couple decades. I still have bad weeks.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't have 2 in a row because I'm in a WAM support group, and I've got all these, you know, I've got my plan and I'm committed to my goals and they're attached to my vision and stuff, but you're going to stumble. So don't be surprised by that. Be ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
So that when you do, you know, it's not taking you out of the game.
Great. So keeping the commitment is obviously a huge part of the program here. And I know we've already talked a little bit about the process controls. My favorite part of this whole thing is the celebrations. And I think what I love about the 12-week year is we get to celebrate a lot, right?
Yeah, and here's the thing, what you celebrate matters because it creates focus, it shapes culture, it builds momentum. So, you know, you think about that with the 12-week year, you've got every 12 weeks, you got this opportunity to celebrate not only the successes, but the progress as well. Sometimes, you know, we get so fixated on the outcome, which we don't control,
Right.
that if we don't hit the outcome, we don't celebrate. We'll celebrate the progress too,
That's good.
because it matters.
And we get to celebrate at the end of each 12-week year, right?
Yeah, so, you know, there's this 13th week, which is the flex week. That's the week where we typically go off and look back and plan for the next 12 weeks. It's also where we celebrate the progress from the 12 weeks we're finishing.
That's great.
So making that part of the way you operate, right? There's a rhythm to how you operate. Every 13 weeks, there's this look back and reload and celebrate, and then we're focused and we're working on it again for the next 12 weeks.
You know, it's what we all do at the end of the year, right? And instead of doing it
Absolutely.
at the end of the year once with the 12-week year, we get to do it at the end of our 12-week year, and we get to do it multiple times throughout the year. So I love it. I love it.
Right.
Okay, so 30 seconds on intentional use of time.
Yeah, so if you're not intentional with your time, right? If you're not intentional about what you say yes to and what you say no to, then the days really work in you. So if you've got those other pieces nailed down, we use a system called performance time, which is time blocking, to take back control of your day. And everyone time blocks to some extent, whether they know it or not. But there's 3 primary blocks we use. There's a strategic block, which is a 3-hour block of time where you're working really on the business, right? Everyone says work on the business, not in the business. That's where you're working on the business. You're knocking out some of that stuff that wouldn't get done if you didn't carve out time for it. It probably has no impact today, but it impacts the future, right? It's the strategic stuff.
Yeah.
The second block is a buffer block, and that's to deal with all the unplanned interruptions, the low-level stuff. So might be 15 minutes, might be an hour, might be once a day, might be 3 times a day, but that's where, in those blocks is where I check my email, I check my voicemail. Someone drops in and says, hey, do you have 5 minutes? Yeah, I got a buffer block at 11 or 12, 4 to 5, you know, what works for you? And so I'm pushing those lower level activities. I'm not saying no, I'm saying yes when it's productive versus maybe when it's convenient for everybody else. And so I'm pushing those to time slots that I have that I know I can go through those one at a time and fast, you know, boom, 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 boom. And then there's the breakout block, you know, making sure you're getting away, that you're avoiding burnout, you're staying refreshed, you're excited about it. So a block of time away from the business. And usually when we talk about that one, Kelly, people go, yeah, I like that, starting that today.
Right.
Right. Look, you earn your way to those with the strategic blocks and
Right.
and buffer blocks. Well, here's what I want you to know. You know, the person that's making 10 times as much or is 10 times as successful isn't working 10 times as long.
Right.
They're probably working less, but they're working different.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the key, you know, the willingness to work different.
I agree. All right, so we're at a point where we want to be mindful of everybody's time here. Tell us a little bit more about how they can find out information about the 12-week year.
12weekyear.com is where you can find us. We have online programs to full-on coaching, one-on-one coaching, small group coaching, accountability groups, all kinds of stuff. I do a lot of, if you're a leader, I do a lot of keynotes, half-day, full-day trainings. But that's the best place to find us. We have a lot of free resources. One of them I was thinking that might be great for your group is 12weekyear.com/free-introduction. /free-introduction. And there's a 3-part video series that I cut that I think your listeners would find really helpful.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. We'll send that link out with the recording so everybody don't frantically be looking for, writing this down and making sure you have it or you didn't hear him say it. That link will go out with the recording and everybody who registered. We had well over 100 people who registered today, Brian, so we're going to get the information out to them. I think that they will enjoy that. It's really been great having you on the webinar series here this month. We do these monthly for everybody who's listening. And just to let you know, sometimes you just want to jump out and take the bull by the horns and achieve something. I don't know Brian. He's a New York Times bestselling author, and I just emailed him and asked him to do this, right, Brian?
You did, yep.
And lo and behold, here we have for our listeners, team members, and our friends, Brian Moran, the New York Times bestselling author of The 12-Week Year. So thank you so much, Brian. It was great having you on. For those of you that want to know more about Team Referral Network or look at our calendar for next month's webinar, please go to teamreferralnetwork.com. And you guys have been awesome. And Brian, you've been awesome. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to everybody, and have a great 12-week year.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Bye, everyone.